It was a regular Monday morning at the bank, the usual hustle and bustle filling the air. The lobby was full of customers standing in line, some making small talk, others lost in their phones. Anthony Richardson, the bank manager, walked through the door, already thinking about the tasks awaiting him. Another busy day, another stack of paperwork to sort through, and a few meetings to attend. Everything seemed perfectly normal until he saw the man. An elderly black man, hunched over and carrying a large, worn sack, walked into the lobby. His clothes were ragged, and his shoes looked like they had been through years of wear. No one really took notice of him at first, but then he did something that would send the entire bank into chaos. He walked directly up to the counter and set the sack down with a soft thud, drawing the attention of the staff. Anthony watched from across the room, curious. "I need to speak with the manager," the man said, his voice low and raspy. His gaze was piercing, and despite his frail appearance, there was something about him that commanded attention. Anthony sighed, rolling his eyes. He had a million things to do, and this seemed like another distraction. But protocol was protocol. He put on his customer service smile and approached the man. "I'm the manager," Anthony said, trying to remain polite. "How can I help you today?" The old man looked up at him, his eyes locking onto Anthony's. There was a strange depth to them, a calm that unnerved Anthony. "I own this bank," the old man said, his voice steady, without a hint of hesitation. Anthony blinked in disbelief, not sure if the man was serious or just delusional. "Excuse me?" he said, laughing awkwardly. "I own this bank," the man repeated, his tone unwavering. "I have the papers to prove it." At first, Anthony thought it was a joke. He half expected the man to burst out laughing and reveal it was all some sort of prank. But the old man's expression didn't change. He wasn't joking. Anthony gave a nervous chuckle, unsure of what to make of the situation. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," Anthony said, shaking his head. "This is a bank and I am the manager. There's no way you own it." But the old man didn't respond with anger or frustration. He simply stared at Anthony, his gaze unwavering. There was something almost eerie about how calm he was. And then, with a deliberate movement, the man opened the sack he was carrying. Anthony's confusion grew as the man pulled out a stack of papers, yellowed with age, and he carefully slid them across the counter toward Anthony. "These are the deeds to the bank," the man said. "My name is Thomas Gray. I've been the rightful owner of this institution for decades." Anthony froze as he looked down at the papers. He was no expert in legal documents, but he knew enough to understand what he was looking at. The documents were official, too official to be fake. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the bank's name on the top of the papers. He scanned the signatures and the fine print. Everything appeared to be legitimate. "I don't understand," Anthony muttered, his voice trembling. "How could this be? How is this possible?" The old man, Thomas Gray, looked at him with calm assurance. "It's simple," he said. "You've all been operating under the assumption that the bank was sold years ago. But you were wrong. I never sold this bank. It was taken from me, and now I've come to take it back." Anthony stared at him, unsure of what to do next. He was still processing what was happening. This wasn't just some crazy claim from an old man. The papers in front of him suggested that Thomas Gray wasn't lying. But how had this all been kept secret? How had no one known about this man, the true owner of the bank? "What are you trying to say?" Anthony asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "You're telling me this whole bank, everything we've done here, has been under false ownership?" Gray nodded slowly. "Exactly." Anthony stood frozen, holding the papers in his hands, his mind racing. He couldn't believe it. This couldn't be real. It was impossible, and yet The evidence in front of him said otherwise. He turned to the rest of the staff, who were watching the scene unfold from the other side of the lobby. They looked just as confused as he felt. Some were whispering to each other, others were clearly too stunned to speak. The tension in the air was palpable. There was no escaping the fact that this was not a simple case of mistaken identity or some harmless prank. The old man had legitimate proof, and now Anthony had no idea how to handle the situation. "I need to speak with my superiors," Anthony said, his voice shaky. This is too much. I'll call the board of directors," but the old man shook his head. "And there's no need," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I've already spoken to them." The atmosphere inside the bank was thick with confusion and anxiety. Anthony stood behind the counter, clutching the papers that had just turned his world upside down. The weight of the situation was starting to sink in. He had always considered himself a professional, someone who ran this branch with efficiency and expertise. But now, with one simple conversation, everything he thought he knew was being torn apart. "This can't be right," Anthony muttered under his breath, his voice a mix of disbelief and panic. "How could I not know this?" Thomas Gray stood quietly across from him, his expression unreadable. He seemed unaffected by the chaos swirling around him. In fact, he appeared to be enjoying the spectacle of it all. There was something unsettlingly calm about him. "You should have done your homework," Gray said softly, as though offering advice, "but now you know the truth." Anthony's mind raced as he stared at the papers in his hand. "I need to get the board on the phone," he said, his voice more urgent now. "I need to get legal involved." He turned to the phone on the counter, but Gray reached out, stopping him with a hand on his wrist. "It won't help," Gray said, his grip surprisingly firm for someone his age. "The board is already on my side. They've known about this for years. They've just been waiting for me to return and claim what's mine." Anthony recoiled, stunned by the admission. "What do you mean they've known?" he asked, his voice rising. "This is insane. No one knew about you this whole time. We thought this bank had been sold off." Gray smiled, a knowing, almost triumphant smile. "Exactly. Everyone thought it was sold to another buyer, and you've all been working here under the wrong assumptions. But the truth is, this bank has always been mine." Anthony's head was spinning. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a conspiracy. The implications were enormous. The bank, the employees, the entire operation, all of it had been founded on a lie. He felt like the rug had been ripped out from under him. For years, he had worked under the illusion that the bank was his employer's property, but now here was the truth. Gray reached for the sack he had placed on the counter and opened it once more. This time, he pulled out a few more papers, legal documents that confirmed his ownership, including a letter from a lawyer who had worked on the case for years. It was clear from the documents that the bank's ownership had been transferred to him many years ago, but somehow the transaction had never been properly executed in the public record. "What now?" Anthony asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What happens to all of us?" Gray didn't respond right away. He just studied Anthony, his gaze sharp. "That's up to you," he said. "I'm here to take back what's mine, and I intend to make sure everything goes smoothly, but you've got to decide if you want to stay or go." The tension in the room was unbearable. Anthony's mind raced as he processed everything that was happening. The old man's claim was valid, the proof was undeniable, and the reality of the situation was sinking in. This wasn't just a case of ownership. This was about power, deception, and the consequences of ignorance. The room was filled with whispers now as the rest of the employees began to realize what was unfolding. No one knew what to do, and no one seemed to be in charge anymore. "I can't believe this," Anthony muttered. This is beyond anything I've ever imagined. It's time for a change, Gray said, his tone final, and I'm here to bring it. The room fell silent, everyone staring at the papers in Anthony's hands, unsure of what would come next. For Anthony, the world had shifted in an instant. The bank he had worked so hard for, the institution he had given so much of himself to, was now no longer his. Everything was about to change, and there was no going back.